Welcome back. You are watching Global Eye. European Commission's climate policy chief Frans Timmermans has begun his two-day visit to India to attend bilateral meetings with a series of Indian leaders, including Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, Minister R.K. Singh, Prahlad Joshi, Bhupendra Yadav as well. The main agenda of the meeting is to discuss the latest developments on India's carbon emission reduction and clean energy transition. COP28 is a major priority as well. I caught up with Frans Timmermans for an exclusive chat about his priorities during the India visit.
Well, you know, India's doing a brilliant job as G20 president, and we want to coordinate with India as closely as possible to also have a successful COP28 in Dubai later this year. And for that, we need to agree on a number of issues, on the changes in international finances, on making sure that we make progress also on loss and damage, and that we take due account of the reports that will be coming out on the progress we have been making, which is not enough. So we will also need to look into ways of increasing our efforts to reduce our carbon emissions.
Right. Speaking about COP28, what kind of consensus would you want on certain issues? If I would like to ask you top 2 or 3 issues where you would want consensus with India, and you're trying to build that consensus during this visit, what would those be?
Well, first of all, we know that we need to transit into renewable energy as quickly as possible, and India is also very much on board to introduce more and more renewable energy, solar energy, offshore wind energy. And hopefully together with India we can reach an international consensus on the levels of introduction of renewable energy on the global scale. Secondly, India for a long time has been championing energy efficiency. And together with India, we hope to be able to also agree global consensus on goals for energy efficiency, because I think this is also very urgent. So these would be 2 top priorities. And on top of that, I also believe that there will be a huge need of international financing of this transition, but also international financing to face the consequences of the climate crisis as they already unfold now. And also here, we hope to reach consensus with India so that we are well prepared for COP28.
When it comes to climate financing, especially the energy transition in developing countries, what kind of global targets on climate financing would you like to see achieved and at least put on the table?
Well, first of all, we need to make sure we don't lose more credibility in delaying the promised $100 billion a year for climate financing. So I hope we can reach a consensus this year that we are on the verge of reaching that target. Secondly, I think it is very important that we change international financial architecture. You know, it was built in 1945. It needs to be brought into the 21st century so that we unleash the potential of multilateral development banks and of the international financial institutions to have a leverage effect on financing. Because some of the money will be public money, but most of the money in investments will have to be private. We're talking about trillions. And there are huge opportunities for these investments if we take off some of the risk that private investors now perceive. So make it less risky for them to invest. We'll unleash investment, we'll help the energy transition, we'll help humanity face this huge challenge, which is the climate crisis.
Right. Speaking about the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is going to kick in from October, there's a lot of concern within the Indian industry and also in the government. Clearly, there is a feeling that this will impact Indian exporters, small businesses to a great extent. To what extent is European Union ready to make concessions for India, and how are you addressing those concerns?
Well, first of all, everything we do will be in line with WTO requirements. So nothing will be in violation of our WTO commitments. Secondly, we will have a trial period so we can see whether this has an effect on Indian businesses, and if it's an adverse effect, we could correct those effects if that is warranted. Thirdly, the context I've been having over the last couple of years with people in the industry and in government point to a very bullish attitude and saying, you know, we can comply with that. We are greening our industry as well. We will not cause carbon leakage by what we're doing. So in effect, CBAM is already working because it's focusing the mind on creating industries that would not be levied in this circumstance. And I think we're a long way in going to the right direction. But once again, we're introducing a trial period. So if the effects are not what we want or go into the wrong direction, we have an opportunity to correct.
Right. So you're saying whatever penalties that are there in the CBAM, this will go through a trial period and EU is open to correcting them if it impacts Indian exports.
Yes, if it does not have the effect we want. The effect we want is to avoid carbon leakage. That's the only reason why we have CBAM, so that we create a level playing field for industries. And my contacts, if you talk about cement or steel, the Indian industries are telling me we are able to operate on a level playing field. We are able to operate in the same way in terms of the carbon footprint. So we don't fear this. But anyway, let's wait for the trial period, see what happens, and then if necessary, we can correct effects that go beyond correcting
What factors could lead you to make corrections?
Well, if the effect is not focused on preventing carbon leakage, because that's the effect. If it leads to perceived or real protectionism, we need to correct it. For us, the only thing that counts is preventing carbon leakage so that European industry competes with global industry on a level playing field.
Right. Just to also ask you about the Indian government's move. India is also looking at standards when it comes to embedded carbon in products manufactured. Yes. They would want EU and other countries to also recognize these standards so that there are no disputes with exports later. Would European Union be open to acknowledging these standards as well?
I think this is a perfect subject to be discussed in the Trade and Technology Council that we have with India. So use that framework to put all these facts on the table, because what India is doing, what we're doing, is in fact putting a price on carbon. That's the only way you can really decarbonize your economy, if you know what it costs. So the European emission trading system helps us really to, and industry is used to that. Over a decade got really used to that. We know what the cost of carbon is. We have a trading system that confronts that. India is considering doing the same. I think that would put us on a level playing field.
I'd like to ask you about the Repower EU plan launched in May 22. According to the EU Green Deal website, this has helped reduce dependency on Russian fossil fuels and save energy consumption by 20%. What would be the targets this year?
Well, what we need to do is to wean ourselves completely of Russian fossil fuels. It is simply too risky for us to depend on them. Putin has used them as a weapon against us, so nobody in Europe wants to depend on them. So the remaining fossil fuel from Russia, mainly through LNG, will have to be replaced by other fossil fuels. And we will have to, also with partners like India, try and reach an agreement on energy efficiency on a global scale, because all of us will need to use less energy. We will continue in that process. We think we are on our way. That is a decision taken by European businesses, but especially by European citizens who've reduced their energy consumption. Let's continue this, and this could also be helped by the rapid introduction of renewable energy. You know, we are amazed by the fact that, for instance, in Europe, we had 40% more solar energy power generation than a year before last year.
I'd like to ask you about what the current level of exports or imports of Russian oil and gas into Europe is. Since September 2022, Russian gas accounts for only 8% of all pipeline gas imported into the EU, compared to 41% imports from Russia in August 2021. Yes. To what extent will you be able to phase out Russian oil and gas imports into EU?
Well, we are optimistic about that, because we were able, nobody thought it possible to reduce it so drastically as we have done. To go from over 40% to below 10% in 1 year is quite an achievement, and without major disruption to households, major disruption to our industry. So to reduce the last bit is happening. Look at energy prices. The price of gas now is only less than 1/10 of the price we had in August last year. It was over 300 euros last year in August. It's below 30 euros today. So the markets are already responding to this. And the fear of not having enough gas in the European system is not present now. Of course, we're not out of the woods yet. Right. There could be a cold winter, there could be other disruptions. But I am very confident that we have sort of mastered the issue, and that we can continue along the same way and also diversify our energy supplies and LNG from other parts of the world.
How do you expect this winter to be? European Union managed to tide over the last winter successfully, but how will this winter be, especially because we're going to see a rebound in the Chinese economy, and 60% of the additional demand is going to come from China. Even the IEA expects some amount of volatility in the markets.
Well, this means that we will have to continue with our energy efficiency targets. We will also have to make sure our reserves are in order. Now our reserves are well filled, so we don't really have a big worry for next winter. On the other hand, as you know, global weather patterns have become completely unpredictable, so we also have to be prepared for a cold winter, and I think we are.
My final question, sir. The EU High Representative has spoken about how the purchase of oil products by European companies is undermining the entire sanctions regime, because they are buying this oil from countries which are using Russian crude to manufacture oil products and export them to Europe. While the EU has not blamed India for this, saying that India is not a part of the European Union and they do not need to comply with European laws, but the fact that EU companies are buying such oil is undermining sanctions, and this needs to be addressed. How is the European Union going to address this?
Well, we're going to address these companies. We don't have an issue with India, and we don't have an issue with how India provides for its energy. It's with our European companies that we have an issue. And so we will address their behavior and make sure that they do not undermine the sanctions. But this is not an issue between us and India. It's an issue between us and these companies.
All right. So it is possible that you may prevent these companies from buying oil which has any origins to Russia?
Well, we don't want them to undermine the sanctions. And at some point when products are completely worked over and turn into other products, this no longer applies. But we don't want European companies to undermine our sanctions against Russia by buying oil and other hydrocarbons indirectly from Russia. We do this why? Because we want to make sure that one European country that is under an aggression, that is being attacked, that is being invaded by somebody who wants to conquer that country, that country is in a position to defend itself, and that the aggressor can no longer finance its barbaric war against Ukraine. And that's why we want these sanctions to work.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Stay tuned to CNBC TV 18 for more news and updates.